technically wrong. The Big Dipper is an asterism. So asterisms are basically constellation-esque things that we look for in the night sky to help us find other stuff. So there is no formal Big Dipper constellation, but it is a bunch of bright stars that are easily recognizable, and we can kind of use them to help us find other stuff in the night sky. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So we take these two stars that kind of make up the tip of the scoop right here, and extend this little line between them out into space. We come across a star. Does anybody know what this star is called? I think it's directly above the North Direction.
The Northern Star?
Yep, it's the Northern Star, or Polaris. So let me go ahead and draw that. So the reason it's called the North Star, or Polaris, if you like the technical term, is because it is directly above our North Pole. So as we're spinning around in space, the top of us is pointed right towards Polaris. So it appears in the north always. And if I go ahead and get rid of all these lines, and move time forward, you guys can see that all of the stars move around as time goes on at varying rates. So as we get close to the equator here, in the middle, they move the most. And then as we get closer to Polaris, or to the South Pole, they move less. So Polaris here hardly moves at all, almost indiscernible. And like I said, that's because it is right above our axis of rotation. As we're spinning around, Polaris is right above us. Anyway, I was talking about constellations, and the Big Dipper is not one, but the Big Dipper is technically part of one. It is called Ursa Major, or the Big Bear. So you can see the Big Dipper's kind of subsumed inside the Big Bear there. The handle makes up the tail, and then the scoop makes up like the abdomen there. So here's the formal constellation. Here's the formal constellation that the Big Dipper is a part of. You don't tell your friends it's you. Next time they're like, oh, the constellation. The actual constellation. And if we use Polaris, we can find a little bit, or you might be able to see it. These stars are a little bit dimmer, harder to see with light pollution, but it makes that's like the scoop there, and then the handle. And of course, if we have the Big Bear, we also have to have the Little Bear. So this is Ursa Minor. So we have these two space bears, and they make up both of our dippers. You may notice that these bears have these long, bushy tails, which is not super typical of real bears. But yeah, so there's actually a story that goes along with why these bears have tails. So our ancient ancestors thought that bears way back when used to have these magical tails. They would spin around super fast and sort of serve as a propeller. So they would fly the bears off into space. They're kind of magical in that way. And these magical space bears lived up in the stars until one day, Ursa Minor here, was looking down on Earth, as you do when you're up in the stars, and he realized that he wanted to come down and visit, so he did. Came down and visited Earth and ended up liking it so much down here that he stayed for the rest of his life. And of course, his magical tail didn't really like that. It meant it belonged in space with the other magical space things. And so it detached itself from him, painfully, I like to think, or not painfully, I mean painfully. Anyway, it flew off back into space, and that's why all the bears here on Earth don't have tails, or at least according to the myth. So there are some other constellations over here in our northern sky, which are kind of hard to see, so let me go ahead and move time backwards a little bit to describe a little better. So the first one I want to talk about is called Cassiopeia. Cassiopeia is super bright and recognizable. You can see the little M there. we turn on our picture there, you can see that Cassiopeia is a queen. She's sitting on her throne with her hair flowing in the wind. So she is the queen of Ethiopia, or the kingdom of Ethiopia. And naturally, if we have a queen, we also have to have a king. So we have the king Cepheus here. Cepheus is pretty hard to see under like any light pollution, with the stars that make Cepheus up are dim. But there's Cepheus. So we have a king and a queen. Naturally, we have to have a princess as well. So here's Andromeda, the princess. And if we turn on her picture, we can kind of see how she's wearing rags and chains on her hands. And there's a story that goes along with this depiction of Andromeda. So basically, Cassiopeia here, the queen, was incredibly boastful. So she would tell anybody who would listen how she was the most beautiful creature in the whole world. And so word got around, this queen, she was bragging about how beautiful she was and how nothing else was more beautiful than her. And the word made it all the way to the ocean where the sea nymphs got wind of it, and they were outraged. The sea nymphs are supposed to be the most beautiful creatures in all the land. So naturally, they go to Poseidon, the king of the sea, or Neptune, and they complain. They tell him of this queen who is boastful, bragging about being the most beautiful creature. And Poseidon hears all this and gets quite angry. So he sends the sea monster Cetus, which we can't see right now, unfortunately. There's a constellation for him, but we can't see it. But anyway, sends the sea monster Cetus to come destroy the whole kingdom of Ethiopia. So the monster makes its way, and people hear about the word of this monster coming to destroy the kingdom. So they tell Cassiopeia and Cepheus, and they pretty much panic and decide to consult an oracle. So they ask this oracle what they need to do to save their kingdom and themselves, and the oracle tells them that they need to sacrifice something that they love dearly in order to save the kingdom. So, being the wonderful parents that they are, they decide to sacrifice their daughter Andromeda. So they chain her up to the rocks on the shore of the ocean, where she awaits her fate, Cetus, the sea monster. And fortunately, this story does have a hero. This hero's name is Perseus. So here we can see Perseus. If we turn on his image, we can see that he is carrying the head of Medusa the Gorgon. He just got done slaying her, which was quite a feat. And depending on who you ask, he either flew in to save Andromeda on the back of Pegasus, the steed right here, so let's go ahead and turn that on. A little bit hard to see, but anyway. Or he just flew in on his magical boots with wings on them. But anyway, he flies in and saves the day, saves Andromeda here. And depending on which version of the story you are reading, they either live happily ever after and get married, or he just goes about his merry way and never thinks of her again. Anyway, let's go ahead and spin around. And talk about some different constellations that appear in our southern sky. So, to find the first one of these constellations, there's 12 of them, we're going to use Orion the Hunter. So Orion is another famous constellation. I'm sure many of you have heard of Orion. Fun fact about Orion, let me go ahead and turn on the stick figure for you guys. So it's kind of hard to see with the drawing there, but his shoulder, this is a star called Betelgeuse. It is a red supergiant, and his foot over here. This is a star called Rigel. It is a blue supergiant. So you can remember the temperatures of stars with Orion by remembering that Orion has a cold shoulder and a hot foot. So that helps you remember the colors of the stars and things about the temperatures. So anyway, let's go ahead and use his belt here. So you can see Orion's belt. This is an asterism, just like the Big Dipper is. It's part of the constellation, but we use his belt in particular as a tool to help us find other things, which is exactly what we're going to do. So we're going to use these three stars and kind of draw a line out into space this way. And we come across this little V. So that V is called Taurus the Troll. That is the first of 12 zodiacal constellations. If you guys know about your horoscopes, you guys are probably familiar with these. Yeah, these are basically 12 constellations, and they're all sort of in this line, which if we have time, I will talk about. But for now, let's go ahead and do a little tour through all the constellations and take a look at some of the deep space objects in them. But before we get started, I would like to get you guys acquainted with a guy named Charles Messier. So he was a dude with a telescope, and he was interested in looking for comets. So he got his telescope and looked into the night sky, pretty much anywhere, hunting for comets, and ended up finding a bunch of different stuff that he didn't know how to explain. It wasn't comets, but he didn't know what they were. So he made a list of all these things, and that list is called Charles Messier's list of deep space objects, and it's labeled with the letter M and then whatever number of the list immediately after. So we're going to be going through a lot of different deep space objects. I'm going to say like, oh, this is M87 or M whatever. So that's what I'm talking about there. But anyway, let's go ahead and start with Gemini. So Gemini has an interesting nebula in it called the Eskimo Nebula. Go ahead and hold out for you guys. Located right there in one of the twins' arms. So here we go. This is a very pretty nebula. It kind of looks a little bit like an Eskimo with a hood on, or a lion, or something of the like. But this is a planetary nebula. So basically, that big point of light in the center there is the remnants of a dying star. When that star ran out of fuel, it collapsed and kind of exploded, which formed this nebula. So this was discovered in 1787. And yeah, we've taken a lot of pictures of this because it's very pretty. Anyway, let's go ahead and move to Cancer now. So Cancer has one of Charles Messier's objects called M44, or the Beehive cluster. So you can kind of see a little zoomed in picture of it there. And we have a Olsen picture here. This is a star cluster. It's one of the closest ones to us. It's about 577 light years away, which is very, very far, but still close in terms of some of these other objects we're going to be talking about. This one you can't